This is all I'm gonna say because I have not fully processed this news. If you built your entire online career queer baiting and imitating a gay man and mocking women, doing skits where you are actively mocking women and imitating gay mannerisms, and then you come online and tell everyone you have a wife?
The internet is the craziest place. You are trying to cancel a man, Nurse John, because he's not gay.
In the age of social media, fame looks a lot different than it used to. It's no longer reserved for movie stars or musicians. Now, anyone with a phone and a Wi-Fi connection can build a following, spark a trend, or become a household name. These creators feel accessible. We watch them grow, share their daily lives, and speak directly to the camera as if we've known them for years. That sense of authenticity is very powerful and rare. But with that connection comes a different kind of pressure. Every post is a performance. Every word is under scrutiny. And the line between public and private starts to disappear. The same audience that celebrates their rise can just as quickly fuel their downfall. One misstep, one viral clip taken out of context, and the backlash is swift and unforgiving. Today we're looking at one of the most followed and talked about figures in the online nursing community. He's built a massive platform, helped many, and faced an overwhelming amount of judgment along the way. His story is a reflection of what it really means to be famous online and the cost that can come with it. 29-year-old John Dela Cruz, better known by his online name Nurse John, is a Filipino-Canadian content creator recognized for his comedic takes on healthcare and nursing life. Born and raised in Bulacan, Philippines, he immigrated to Canada in 2012 with his family, where he began his studies at Dawson College. After 3 years, he transferred to McGill University in Montreal to pursue a degree in nursing. After graduating, he went on to work as a full-time nurse, a role that would later serve as the foundation for his creative work. He decided to pursue nursing after caring for his grandfather, who was suffering from lung cancer and Alzheimer's. In an exclusive interview from the Nursing Beat, this is what he had to say about his motivation to care for people. "My mom had to leave the house and work overseas to provide for me," Nurse John recalls. With his mom out of the house, his grandparents stepped in. "One day we noticed my grandfather was throwing up blood and losing weight. We didn't know at the time that it was lung cancer, stage 4. They said he had 6 months to live." The experience was a turning point for John. He decided to become a nurse. "I couldn't think of any other profession but nursing, where you treat strangers like family." He wanted to help strangers navigate situations similar to his own and help them feel peace during crisis. "I saw my whole family struggling to take care of him because we didn't have a nurse at home showing us how to feed him or what to do if he's having trouble breathing or swallowing. It was traumatizing seeing this, and I felt this regret that I couldn't do more. When I arrived here, I told myself, I want to do something in my life where I can take care of someone like I'm taking care of my grandpa."
I love it. You know, I did this for my grandpa, my lolo. He died of Alzheimer's and lung cancer. But it's okay. I know he's happy because...
However, this wasn't the only reason John wanted to become a nurse. He was inspired by his mother as well, who he looks up to as a role model because of how she cared for him and their family her entire life by working numerous jobs that included her working for factories and even being a healthcare worker.
I was born in the Philippines and I was raised by a single mother. So my mom has been working a full-time job since the day that she found out that she was pregnant. She basically decided that she wanted to give me the best possible life. So she works so hard. She works in like a Nestle, which is like a chocolate factory, Jollibee food chain, so customer service, and then decided that she wants to be a caregiver. So she worked in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and now Canada, and she's still working as a caregiver till now. One of the biggest influence in my life that I wanted to do something where I can be just like her, where I can give back and care.
Graduating during the peak of the pandemic was a challenge for Nurse John. Starting any new job fresh out of school is tough on its own, but entering the workforce as a nurse during one of the most deadly global health crises of the 2020s made it exponentially more difficult. He was expected to preserve lives in the middle of a staffing crisis, surrounded by fear, chaos, and loss. When interviewed about his initial days as a nurse, this is what he had to say. "The pressure of saving people's lives was crushing. I didn't have support. I didn't have a sense of, hey, you're not alone. You're not the only one going through this. I felt like I was getting thrown into all this, Dela Cruz said. Already working as a new nurse is a lot of stress, but with a new virus, there's this added stress with new regulations, ways of preventing co-infection, and it changes every single day. During that time, TikTok was exploding in popularity. Like many others, John initially joined in with the lighthearted dance videos and casual posts, using the app as a brief escape from the stress of work. But what changed everything was an unintentional upload, a video he recorded while crying from the stress of work. Although the situation was serious, he edited the video with humor, hoping to laugh about it later with his friends. What he didn't realize, though, was that in the chaos of hearing a code blue announcement over the hospital intercom, he had accidentally posted the clip publicly before rushing back. When he returned to his phone, the video had already taken off. Within 48 hours, the video had gone viral, racking up over 1 million views. John was informed by his family and friends, but at first, he didn't think much of it. But as he began reading the comments, something changed. Healthcare workers from around the world shared how deeply they related to his experience, many describing similar emotional breakdowns during shifts and how isolating those moments had felt. Patients and their families also reached out, thanking him for showing a side of nursing that they rarely got to see. The video, unintentionally raw and vulnerable, struck a chord far beyond what John had expected. Seeing the impact of his content gave him a new perspective. It reminded him that humor and honesty could bring comfort to people in dark moments. While it took him 5 months to feel ready to post something like that again, he eventually did, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in how after going viral, John didn't waste any time riding the wave. He started pumping out skits on TikTok like clockwork. The formula was simple. The raw, absurd, and borderline traumatic realities of being a nurse, served up with humor and deadpan delivery. Most of his content zeroed in on the shared chaos of the profession, moments that nurses know all too well, and that patients would probably rather not remember. In one skit, he parodies the all-too-familiar horror story of patients randomly leaving their beds at night like it's a scene from a hospital-themed found footage film. In another, he captures the slow mental breakdown that is nursing Monday through Sunday, mapping out the existential decay by day of the week.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
But TikTok wasn't the endgame. He eventually made the jump to YouTube, where he launched a podcast, a longer-form space where he invites people to air their grievances with capitalism, nursing, and the emotional burnout factory we call modern employment. In one episode, he asked fans to submit reasons they hated their jobs. To be honest, it did not disappoint.
Have submitted me on my Instagram because the question that I asked is, why do you hate, dislike, don't like your job?
And instead of laughing them off or making it a cringe fest, he met their stories with real empathy, acknowledging how much it sucks to feel stuck in a job that's eating away at your mental health.
It's valid. Not because you have not experienced something doesn't mean that it's not true. It's over dramatic. Do not invalidate someone else's feeling, because a lot of people, mostly in the internet, do that. They invalidate someone else's feeling and tell them, oh my God, you're just being dramatic. That's not even that bad.
Then he took it a step further. He opened the floor to stories from fellow nurses, exposing the straight-up toxic environments they've had to survive in. One submission laid out the kind of internal bullying that happens behind the sterile curtains, an open secret in the nursing world that rarely gets airtime.
I've heard so many horror stories regarding bullying in the workplace from peers and colleagues, and I've experienced and witnessed nurse-to-nurse bullying firsthand. We're all sick and tired from the work that we do, but once we start mistreating the only people who understand what we're going through, then that's where we fall apart as a profession. The COVID pandemic especially.
This wasn't just content, it was damage control for a profession that eats its young. Nurse John wasn't just making skits anymore, he was building a lifeline for nurses who felt like they were drowning. He knows the system sucks because he's lived through it. He tries to make it bearable for the ones just entering the mess. So when another nurse influencer randomly decided to call him out, Yeah, people were confused, because say what you want, he's one of the few actually trying to make the job suck less. At first, he saw TikTok as just another platform filled with people dancing. But over time, he began to realize that it was much more than that. It was a space for self-expression. He started to view it as a place where people could truly be themselves, raw and unfiltered. Embracing this idea, he decided to be authentic and unafraid of looking silly, dancing freely, or dressing in quirky ways for his videos. He understood that his audience craved this realness and appreciated his willingness to step outside conventional boundaries.
A lot of people have been asking me how I started all of this content creation in the internet, and what I always tell them is that you just have to do it and be raw, be yourself, because that's what I provide to all of my audience, to show the real me. I never show anything that's different about me. I just give them who I am as a person from real life to the internet, and that's what people likes, because then they can relate to you. And if you aspire to be as a content creator, just trust yourself and feel the content creation, enjoy it, have fun with it. It shouldn't be a stressful thing to do. All you have to do is to make sure that the people that you're connecting with are relating to you and seeing you as who you are as a person. And that's what mattered the most.
However, his way of expressing himself through his body language, tone, and manner of speaking came across as feminine to many people in the Western world. Yet this wasn't unusual at all in his own culture. For Filipino men, the way they presented themselves was perfectly normal, and in many cases even celebrated. Unfortunately, it was this very cultural difference that made him a target of Nurse Lex, the internet personality known as Lex on TikTok, who took issue with his unique style of expression. Because of the way Nurse John carries himself, a lot of people assumed he was gay or queer. So it came as a surprise to many, including Lex, when she found out that he is actually married to a woman. On June 13th, 2024, Nurse John posted on his Instagram with the caption, "Let's make dinner for the wife." This was the first time a lot of his following found out he had a wife, even though he never hid it. Once this post was made, Lex responded by posting a lengthy TikTok where she essentially bashed Nurse John, accusing him of imitating gay men and mocking women in his skits. After learning that he's straight, she deemed his behavior unacceptable. Lex clarified that she also has an issue with gay men mocking women, but argued that it was more sinister, in her words, when a straight man acts gay while performing content she believed was disrespectful to women.
This is all I'm going to say because I have not fully processed this news. If you built your entire online career queer baiting and imitating a gay man and mocking women, doing skits where you are actively mocking women and imitating gay mannerisms, and then you come online and tell everyone you have a wife? I want to be clear that I don't support, nor do I think it's funny when gay men mock women or imitate women either, but it's especially sinister when you've been queer baiting and you're straight. What? Anyway, just add that to the list. Add it to the list.
The problem with Lex's take is that Nurse John has never hidden the fact that he has a wife. He's mentioned her multiple times across platforms, including in a Valentine's Day post he shared on Facebook.
Hey Bessie, come with me. We're gonna get my wife her Valentine's gifts, and also I told her that I'm gonna get...
Lex also failed to provide any actual evidence of Nurse John mocking women. While it's true that he has portrayed female characters in his skits, often in a humorous, exaggerated way, there's no clear indication that these portrayals were intended to be disrespectful. Lex didn't point to any specific examples that showed Nurse John being harmful or offensive toward women in his content. While Lex poses herself as someone fighting for social justice and LGBTQ+ rights, her reaction suggests a lack of cultural understanding and sensitivity. By assuming Nurse John's sexuality based solely on his mannerisms and tone, and then using that assumption as the basis for criticism, she undermines the very inclusivity and expression she claims to support. More importantly, she dismisses the cultural nuances that shape how people from different backgrounds present themselves. At the end of the day, Nurse John was simply expressing himself authentically, and there's nothing wrong with that. In another TikTok, Lex doubled down on her criticism by showing a message from an unverified source. The message claimed to have told Nurse John that his content was harmful to queer people, especially queer nurses. Lex used this to support her stance and continued to push the idea that Nurse John's skits were problematic. She asked her viewers to look closely at how women were portrayed in his videos and decide for themselves if those portrayals were positive or negative. Despite making strong claims, she again failed to provide any concrete examples of Nurse John mocking women or intentionally queerbaiting.
Not even just a wife, but it sounds like multiple queer creators have attempted to correct his behavior, and this is how this went down. I got this message from another large nursing page today about an interaction that they had, as well as a different large creator, when they attempted to educate John, a straight man, as to why it is harmful to mock queer people and women in his content. This is the second half of that message. It's Pride Month. It is Pride Month. And I need you guys to listen to gay people when they tell you that something is harmful. And a straight man deliberately portraying himself as queer for content is harmful. A straight man who ignores mutuals of his who are queer, who explain to him why it's harmful, and then doubles down and continues making that content, is doing it on purpose. It is not up to straight people, like those of y'all in my comments, to tell gay people that it's fine. As said in the beginning of this message, it is intentional baiting. He knows it. He has been spoken to about it multiple times. More than anything, I need you guys to pay close attention to the times at which he dresses up as a woman. How is that woman being portrayed? Is that woman being painted in a good light, or is she the butt of the joke? You can say that, oh, it's just a nursing joke, but it's not. It is rooted in misogyny. And to actively portray and act out gay mannerisms when you have been directed, redirected, and asked not to as a straight man is deliberate.
Instead of backing up her accusations with evidence, she shifted the burden of proof onto her audience, expecting them to validate her claims. This approach comes off as impulsive and emotionally charged, especially when considering that both Lex and Nurse John are nurses themselves. Her public attack on a fellow healthcare worker contributes to the harmful stereotype of nurses bullying one another, a pattern that Nurse John has previously spoken out against and sought to break within the profession. What makes Lex's claims even more questionable is the response from her own followers. Many of her commenters began pushing back. One Reddit user wrote, "Here is my issue. Lex is claiming he's queerbaiting based on her perception only. John never said he was gay. Never. He never intentionally implied he was gay. Nor did he imply he was straight. He just made skits. She's the one who's bringing reality into this." Another comment pointed out the hypocrisy in her argument, saying, "Wait, Lex, who says she's queer but is straight, presenting and primarily dates men, is accusing someone of queerbaiting? I'm not saying she's not queer, but isn't her whole platform supposed to be about presenting how you want to present and loving who you want to love? Labels are unnecessary. It's no one's business." She's basically feeding right into the whole narrative of, if you look like a man but have feminine mannerisms, you must be gay and can't be married to a woman. What's next? She's gonna start telling people which bathroom to use too? Lex tried to defend her stance by claiming she had lived and worked in the Philippines. While that may be true, simply working in another country does not mean someone has a full understanding of the local culture, values, or nuances, especially those surrounding gender expression and social dynamics.
And it is wrong. Just for added relevance, because apparently I need to do this, I lived in Manila. I lived in the Philippines. I worked at a tuberculosis hospital in Tondo, in Barangay 105. Not all Filipino men are feminine, and it is absolutely insane to even claim that. Like, that's crazy. Here is me, right there, TBT to blonde Lex, working in a direct observation treatment service center in the Philippines for tuberculosis patients. Also me with Ace, my favorite person on the planet, and an orphan.
Filipino culture has its own long history of gender fluidity and acceptance of effeminate expression among men. Not all Filipino men behave this way, but it's not uncommon or viewed negatively within many communities. Lex's claim to cultural understanding feels shallow, especially when used to discredit someone who actually grew up within that culture. Her insistence that her interpretation is the correct one, despite being told otherwise by both Filipino creators and Filipino commenters, shows a troubling lack of humility. Many pointed out that she was dismissing a cultural lens that she's not fully equipped to speak from. Living in a country for a short time and working with locals doesn't grant someone the right to define what is or isn't acceptable in that culture. Her oversimplified take only added fuel to the fire. Even after being informed that her criticisms disregarded important aspects of Filipino culture, Lex initially refused to back down. She posted another TikTok, now deleted, that came across to many viewers as racially insensitive. The original video is no longer available, but another TikTok creator by the name of HistoryIn60 reacted to it in a stitched video.
Clearly. Regardless of their own upbringing or ethnic background, that type of humor.
That because of your internal racial bias. In my admittedly limited perspective, I have noticed that that is a comfort character for a lot of people because either they are that person, they've worked with that person, their mom is that person, their aunt is that person. Like, it's not a negative connotation.
I'm not willing to comment on the morality behind it.
You already did.
But all I am saying is that it is not new. And there's actually terms we've assigned for that specific brand of performance and humor. Thank you.
In the clip, Lex implied that Nurse John was playing a negative role within his own community by making jokes that demean his culture to appease white audiences. She referenced a term they use for people who do this, though she never clarified who they were or what that term actually was. Many viewers interpreted the implication as derogatory and offensive. She framed her argument in a way that suggested Nurse John was dealing with internalized racism, despite never having spoken to him or shown any evidence for that claim. Once again, what makes this especially problematic is the fact that Lex, a white woman with a very limited experience in the Philippines, positioned herself as the authority on what's appropriate for a Filipino creator to express. Her framing suggested she believed she had the right to speak on behalf of the Filipino community, even though members of that community were telling her otherwise. The tone of her video and her choice of words gave off the impression that she saw herself as a sort of savior or moral compass for marginalized people, despite targeting one of the few widely recognized Filipino nurses in Western media. On the other hand, Nurse John had become a popular figure, not just for his humor, but also for being a visible Filipino voice in an industry where representation is often lacking. Filipino nurses are a huge part of the Western healthcare system, yet remain underrepresented in mainstream media. Instead of supporting this representation, Lex used her platform and the fact that it's Pride Month as a stage to discredit a fellow creator. Many viewers believe her attacks were fueled by either conscious or unconscious jealousy, especially considering Nurse John's greater reach and success. What started as a critique of content turned into a personal attack, rooted in assumptions about gender, race, and culture. It's one thing to raise a concern about media representation, but it's another to weaponize identity to tear someone down, especially when that person is part of a culture you don't fully understand. Lex's actions ultimately sparked more backlash against her than against Nurse John, and many now view her as someone who, under the guise of advocacy, caused unnecessary harm to a fellow marginalized voice. After the controversy, a lot of Filipinos and nurses came out to defend Nurse John. A creator named Julesy also weighed in, pointing out that what Lex was doing to Nurse John is actually really similar to what white Americans historically did to Filipino men. She explained that there's documented evidence showing how, during colonization, white Americans used to demonize Filipino men for how they expressed themselves, especially when their behavior didn't line up with Western ideas of masculinity. This wasn't random either. It was a tactic used to create a more submissive, controlled Filipino population. Jules even referenced Colonial Pathologies by Warwick Anderson, a book that talks about exactly this kind of cultural policing. The way Lex called out Nurse John for how he acts isn't new. It echoes that same kind of historical shaming. just in a modern online setting.
The crazy thing to me about a white woman getting on this app and accusing Nurse John of queerbaiting because he has a wife but comes off like sassy and feminine, or however she wants to describe him, is that there's an actual documented history of white Americans trying to demonize the sexuality and gender of Filipinos as a means to create a submissive audience, a submissive Filipino audience to the American will. Allow me to back this up with some very dense history books. Warwick, Anderson, and Colonial Pathologies. This is like archaeology of knowledge. Foucault on the head, baby. This is history of medicine. Very dense, all right? But he, at length, talks about the American military's, like, preponderous fear of Filipino men, in particular, their sexuality and gender, and their ability to move throughout.
Honestly, watching all this unfold, it really feels like Lex is more interested in being right than being helpful. Instead of listening to the community she claims to stand for, she talks over them. She positions herself as some kind of moral authority, but in doing so, she ends up repeating a harmful pattern just under the disguise of activism. However, Julesy wasn't the only one who talked about how what Lex said was wrong. There were other creators as well who spoke in support of Nurse John. Out of them, one response in particular stood out to us. It was from a queer Filipino girl named Althia, who explained why Lex RN completely misunderstood Filipino men and their so-called feminine behavior. She started off by giving some background about why there are so many Filipino nurses in the US. She explained that after the Spanish left the Philippines, the Americans took over. Then after World War II, the US needed more healthcare workers, so they trained Filipinos to become nurses. This created a steady flow of Filipino nurses to the US, since it gave them a better chance at better jobs and opportunities. Even now, about 25% of healthcare workers in the US are Filipino. But most people outside the US don't know this because Filipinos are underrepresented in the media. That's why she said Nurse John is such a big deal in Filipino communities. He represents a group that's had a huge impact on American healthcare, but doesn't get much recognition. Plus, his skits are super relatable, especially for people in nursing, which again has a huge overlap within the Filipino community. Althia pointed out that Lex was looking at Nurse John through a Western lens, without fully understanding the culture he comes from. She explained that a lot of Filipino men naturally express themselves in ways that might seem feminine from an American or Western point of view, but in the Philippines, that kind of behavior isn't weird or out of place. Just because not all Filipino men act like that doesn't mean it's not culturally accepted. Lex taking that and calling it queerbaiting completely missed the point. For a lot of people, Althia's video brought much needed clarity. She also reminded Lex and everyone watching that spending a bit of time in the Philippines doesn't make someone an expert on that culture. Lex mentioned that she had lived and worked in the Philippines, but Althia pointed out that being there temporarily isn't the same as growing up in that culture, being shaped by it and understanding its deeper social dynamics. And honestly, we agree. Just because you've been somewhere or even lived there for a while doesn't give you the right to define what is or isn't part of that culture, especially when you're doing it based on your own worldview. At the end of the day, Lex came off as arrogant and self-absorbed. She acted as if she had the authority to speak on behalf of a culture she's not even part of. She talks about racism and biases, yet fails to acknowledge her own biases around gender and sexuality, and how those expectations vary depending on the race or culture someone is from. In trying to call someone out, Lex actually exposed how close-minded she is. She thought she was being progressive, but instead she boxed people into traditional roles and completely ignored cultural differences. Althia made a great point about how straight men expressing themselves in ways that are seen as more feminine in the West doesn't mean they're queerbaiting, it just means they're comfortable being themselves. They don't need to fit into some rigid definition of masculinity or attach a label to how they speak or move. Lex's obsession with assigning meaning to every mannerism says more about her than it does about Nurse John. If anything, she's the one clinging to outdated ideas of what men are supposed to act like.
Hi, my name is Althia. I'm queer, I'm Filipina, and almost all of my immediate family are nurses, so I just wanted to add a little bit of my perspective on the situation. First, I want to say Lex, this creator that I'm stitching, is doing great things, raising awareness for Palestinians. You should go check out her profile, donate to causes, all of that good stuff. But I will say, I think her criticism of Nurse John is a little bit lacking, and let me explain why. First, we need to talk about the history of Filipinos and Filipino nurses specifically in America and why it is such a thing. So America colonized the Philippines after the Spanish colonized the Philippines, and particularly in post-World War II, America had created a program that incentivized Filipinos to become nurses and to fill gaps that were left by Americans in the American healthcare workforce. So again, post-World War II, a lot of Filipino nurses were being encouraged, essentially incentivized to come to America and be nurses. And that's why we see so many Filipino nurses. But at the same time, and again, 25% of Filipino adult workers in America are healthcare workers, frontline healthcare workers. So it's not just a stereotype, it is coming from a certain place of truth in that sense. And again, it's a history of colonialism, it's a history of American involvement, all that stuff. With that being said, even though we have such a significant presence in healthcare, a lot of media fails to recognize that. We have shows like Grey's Anatomy, we have all these doctor nursing shows, medical shows that don't have any Filipinos in them. So we're lacking that representation there. A lot of Filipinos have always wondered, why are we not represented in the media in this way? So I think that's where Nurse John comes in. Nurse John has had such a huge following on social media, partially because I think we don't get that representation anywhere else. And I feel like it is a representation, again, that we are just lacking, that we are embracing when we see, which is why Nurse John has so many Filipino followers, why he has so many nurses following him. So there's that piece. Now let's go to the second piece about gender and sexuality expression. Everyone's saying, Nurse John is queer baiting, I think are missing two things. The first thing that they're missing is the Filipino culture. And I recognize that Lex has spent time in the Philippines. She was on a medical mission there, which has its own ethical and moral implications, but I'm not even going to go there. But just because you spent a couple of months or however long she was there, I don't think that necessarily means you understand all the nuances of Filipino culture, and I'm not pretending that I do either, but I was born in the Philippines, and again, I have so many Filipino nurses and Filipino people in my life, my family. So here's what I'm going to say about Filipino culture and sexuality. There are many Filipino men that are straight but act more effeminate, especially from a Western viewpoint, and that's just the way it is. Again, there's a lot of nuance behind that, but I can't go into that in just a little TikTok video. So there's that piece. And the second piece is there is a lot of hypocrisy within the queer community of accusing straight men of queer baiting when they are just presenting themselves in a feminine way. And it's silly, because why are we all of a sudden gatekeeping how people are allowed to present in their sexuality? That seems to me antithetical to being a supportive, inclusive community. So there's those two pieces there. Again, there's this nuance of Filipino culture and how it intersects with queer culture, and how all of that is in the background of this person, Nurse John, has a huge platform because we Filipinos recognize the truth, the humor, the familiarity, the comfort in the videos that he makes. I think his videos are amazing, funny. I see my mom, I see my dad, I see my stepmom, I see my brother in these videos, because that is the reality of us growing up and, being in this culture that has, that I grew up in, basically. Again, this is not any hate to Lex, or anyone else in the comments of her videos that are explaining their point of view, and I understand there are queer people that have had conversations with John, but I think there is this piece of Filipino culture, Filipino nursing culture, that is missing from the conversation that I just wanted to input. Again, Western people viewing certain Filipino men that are straight might see them as queer baiting, might see them as like they're strange, like why is he acting so feminine? But again, it's very hypocritical in a sense, because again, why are we gatekeeping how people are allowed to present their sexuality, especially from a culture which you are not necessarily fully familiar with? But again, I think Lex is doing great things otherwise. I think that her particular criticism of Nurse John is, to me, a little bit, it's more nuanced. So that's all I have to say.
Another creator who goes by the name HistoryIn60 also called out LexRN, this time for implying that Nurse John was somehow biased against his own race. In her video, she pointed out that Lex was basically trying to tell a whole group of people how they should feel about Nurse John and his content, all because of biases Lex hadn't unpacked in herself. She explained that Lex has no right to speak over Filipinos or try to dictate how they should feel about someone from their own community. Filipino viewers, and really anyone watching Nurse John, are fully capable of forming their own opinions without Lex trying to control the narrative. Not only that, but she also pointed out that Lex was basically implying people only enjoy Nurse John's content because it plays into their own racial biases. That alone says a lot about how Lex sees herself. It makes her sound like she thinks she's morally superior to everyone else, which honestly comes off as low-key narcissistic. Instead of letting people enjoy content or form their own opinions, she assumes she knows better than everyone else, including the communities she claims to defend. There was even a Reddit comment from someone claiming to know her personally, and while we can't verify if it's 100% legit, what they said honestly lines up with how Lex has been acting. The commenter wrote, "I grew up with Alexis. She was basically your classic privileged white girl cheerleader that went on to become a nurse and suddenly is an activist. But when she gets corrected by POC or LGBTQ people, she attacks them, because at the heart of it, it's all self-centered. She used to be like Tumblr famous in high school and would post makeup tutorials and straight up said one time, 'No tranny makeup here,' and I know it was years ago, but she's not as innocent and good-hearted as she claims to be. I had to block her because seeing her content everywhere annoys the out of me, knowing who she really is, while everyone praises her for being such a good person, LMAO. Even if we take that comment with a grain of salt, it honestly reflects what a lot of people are starting to realize. Lex might present herself as this caring, progressive voice online, but the way she speaks over marginalized communities, refuses to listen when she's wrong, and continues to center herself in every conversation shows otherwise. This situation with Nurse John just exposed the kind of person she really is, and it seems like more and more people are catching on. What's ironic is that Lex claims to be fighting for inclusion and representation, yet her mindset is actually more in line with conservative thinking, putting strict rules on how straight or gay men can act. In trying to gatekeep queerness, she ended up pushing a harmful and limiting narrative. The funniest part is that Nurse John didn't even have to respond to her directly. His own audience, along with tons of creators on TikTok, especially those in the nursing and Filipino communities, shut her down for him. Lex never issued a real apology for the situation, nor did she take back anything she said. Instead, all she did was quietly delete her TikTok posts, which honestly just feels like an admission of guilt and defeat. If she really stood by her words, she would have left those videos up and continued the conversation. But she didn't. She wanted to stir the pot and get people to go after John. But when it backfired and the crowd turned on her instead, she couldn't handle it. And while Lex was dealing with the mess she created, scrambling to save face and defend herself from the same audience she tried to weaponize, this was John's response.
Thanks, Bessie, for getting married with me.
I'm gonna put that. So we're here in the conference. The nurses partied last night. Somebody's CPAP is here. Is that a Filipino nurse? Pump beeps every freaking time. Okay, Bessie, we're here. The conference is about to start.
So being able to put more content out there, showing what we go through so that other people understand.
October 2022, I started my first mental health leave, including a 9-week stay as an inpatient for trauma treatment. What do you think I did with my time in October 2022? Like TikTok. And guess who I found?
Me.
It's just a very sincere thank you for what you've been doing, because you gave me the first real smile I've had in a while, and a significant belly laugh.
At the end of the day, Nurse John has been a positive force in the nursing community. His content brings humor, relatability, and a sense of unity to a field that's often stressful and emotionally draining. He represents an underrepresented group in Western healthcare and has become a source of inspiration for so many Filipino nurses and aspiring healthcare workers. He never claimed to speak for anyone but himself, and yet his content resonates with people across cultures because it's authentic. John shows you that you can be compassionate, funny, expressive, and still be a professional, and that's exactly the kind of influence the nursing world needs. Meanwhile, Lex, who claims to be an activist and advocate, actually perpetuates the exact negativity she says she stands against. She judged someone based on stereotypes, projected her own biases onto him, and when called out, refused to listen or learn. Instead of lifting up fellow nurses or creating unity, she tried to tear someone down based on assumptions. That's not activism, it's ego. On the other hand, Nurse John's calm, respectful silence in the face of backlash speaks louder than any TikTok rant. His character, consistency, and the love he gets from his community say everything. With this, we'd like to end the video. That's all we have on Nurse John today. At the end of the day, we don't really think he did anything wrong, and neither does the internet. If you've stayed this far into the video, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give this video a huge thumbs up. Leave a comment down below to let us know what your opinions are on Nurse John and this entire controversy. Do you think Nurse John is queerbaiting? Is he really trying to mock women and make fun of them? Or is he just trying to spread smiles across people's faces with his entertaining and funny videos?